to go back to your seats and we get started on the rest of the morning program.
You don't have to leave.
All right, I just stuck it up there in the corner, so I don't think anybody else is going to be named Coastal Soil Systems, right?
Oh, I'd be surprised. So Dave, you don't have PowerPoint?
Nope.
You're dynamics.
Yeah, but I'm talking some non-dynamic stuff.
I'm going to ask that everybody get back to your seats, please. Okay, last call. Those of you in the back, you know who you are. Those of you in the back. Okay.
You gotta call them out by name.
All right, let's get started here.
Who's the guy in the green shirt?
Green plaid shirt. Okay, we're getting everything filtering back in.
They're getting there.
Okay, we got it down to a dull roar now, I think. And once you start talking, you'll be quiet.
Hi, Dave.
Yes.
Hi, Al.
Okay, so moving on with the rest of this morning's program, what we have up for the next, actually two presentations. These are the recommendations from the 2016 NCSS regional conferences. And we're going to start off with Dave Hoover, who will summarize the West and the South meetings, correct?
Correct.
Hey.
Good morning. I also want to welcome you to Idaho. This was my state for about 20 years. I have great memories of this state. Seeing some of the pictures that were up was wonderful. I want to thank the university for their involvement. There was a time that the university was banned from email with the U.S. government. I don't know if many of you know that, but part of their tag on the email addresses, it was vandals.edu. So when I got a report that I wasn't getting emails through from students or from Paul, and I was going, well, what's wrong with all this? And so I called our IT people, and they say, well, that's a flagged word. And that Department of Homeland Security has said that we cannot accept emails from that. So I had to, with government, I had to fill out a special form just to allow that email address in order to communicate with the United States government. And I'm so glad that we did. I also want to recognize that we are being live streamed. I think this is a cool new development. I'm hearing reports from across the country, getting little texts and that it is working, that we are trying this out. We want to utilize this at other conferences. So I would also ask the speakers that when you are speaking to kind of stay within line of the camera. So with that, I will say hi to my mom, and hello to everybody else too. So Curtis and I are going to talk about the things that happened and some of the major recommendations that happened at the regional conferences. So I've got the West. How many of you from the Western region? Some little whoops and hollers, come on. How many of you from the South region? Okay, they're more vocal. They're not as many, but there are more of them. So I'll go through some items from the West Conference first. So this was held in Fairbanks, Alaska. It was held on July 25th to the 29th last year. Some of the highlights that were more focused on Western and certainly Alaska type issues were climate hubs from a northern perspective. There was the preview of the movie on Between Earth and Sky, which featured Alaska issues and Alaska soil scientists. It was cool to see people I knew on there. Lots of issues on permafrost and how land use decisions are affected by permafrost. Tribal issues were very clearly presented at that conference. And there was a great field trip. And I think some of the more unique things that we saw on the field trip were things like a permafrost tunnel. I've read about permafrost for a while. I never really got to work with it, but I got to walk into permafrost in a tunnel. And that was just way cool because I could see it. I could see what it looked like with the rocks and the soil around it. Got to hear from an engineer's perspective about the Alaska pipeline, which was also pretty awesome. That's quite a feat of engineering, not just like an irrigation pipeline that I was used to in the Midwest. And also things on thermokarst topography, which again was something that I had not dealt much with. So we got to see some unique things up there. The next West Regional Conference is going to be held in Tucson, Arizona on May 21st through the 25th of 2018. So I'm going to go through some of the major items that were recommended and discussed by some of the standing committees. These, I'm sure, will be brought up in your subsequent committees that you'll be going to this afternoon and tomorrow, maybe just this afternoon. So I encourage you, as you hear things, you go, that never got resolved. Go to the committee meetings, bring it up again, push for resolution on these things. So we don't just table things and leave them for another 2 years from now. This is what the regional committees do. They promote things to the national committees, and they expect some action. So give it to them. Action, that is. So on the standards committee, so there were some proposed DENSIC great groups of UDEPs and AQUEPs. I get to jump right into the Tucky stuff right off. So the committee approved the proposal to recognize the subgroup level for UDEPs and AQUEPs. For instance, DENSIC district reps and DENSIC endo-AQUEPs. They also looked at proposed changes for spotosols and spotic horizons, spotosols and spotic horizons designations. For instance, adding a reaction for iris tubes as a redoxamorphic feature. And they approved that proposal with a few modifications. And again, these are things that you can talk about, those modifications in committee. They also proposed the definition for AL great groups such as aliquods and L-orthods, and they requested that more information be presented. So hopefully that will have some more discussion on it. There were proposed changes in limnic horizons and materials, mostly for non-histosols. Some of the things that were approved were to allow the use of the L horizon to be used as horizon nomenclature when describing soils that do not classify as histosols. They looked to allow and they approved the proposal that allowed the use of diatomaceous, marley, and coprogenous earth textural modifiers for horizons, again, that are not in histosols. They approved the proposal to allow limnic subgroups for great groups outside of histosols, in particular limnic cryoqueps. They approved to establish a diatomaceous substitute particle size class for mineral soils with limnic material. And they approved the proposal to establish an opaline mineralogy class. They had a few other items that were for discussion. One were for inconsistencies that they identified in the use of surface mantles. They didn't propose new wording, so that's for y'all to work on. They also wanted to see in the field book for describing and classifying, or describing and sampling soils, a decision tree for bedrock, fragments, and densic materials. So a little bit more definition was needed on that. They wanted to see a reevaluation of the isotic mineralogy class, particularly in sandy soils. They wanted to quantify the features and expression of the vesicular horizon so that they could do more initiation of the Urmic diagnostic features. So in other words, instead of just identifying it, start to quantify and qualify some of the features of it. And they also discussed the oxyaquic subgroup for fragiudults, but they decided that there needed to be more discussion on that. So that was the standards committee. Then the research committee had their meetings too. They wanted to talk about and propose to the national committees here to reinvigorate partnerships with academic cooperators for additional research and education. And they wanted relevant research. So that's one of those words that's kind of, who defines relevant? Well, maybe y'all can when you have your research committee meeting. They wanted more graduate and undergraduate student training, particularly in GIS training and spatial analysis. They discussed and wanted to promote the idea of using the Cooperative Ecosystem Study Units, or CESUs, as a mechanism and a lower cost for overhead mechanism for doing research. And they wanted more equipment out in the field. They wanted more GPR, EMI, and other technology equipment, including drones. Just heard a lot about drones on NPR driving out here. So the research committee also discussed data. They wanted new data acquisition for spatial covariates, more integration of field observation, site information. They wanted to look at scaling data, having the ability to scale up or scale down different data sets. They had quite a discussion on communications within this committee, where they wanted to look at more interdisciplinary science teams, particularly with critical zone observations, observatories, in ecological research, LTER sites, and they wanted more involvement with NCSS partners. That's why we're here. They also wanted to see a broader impact of the soil survey network. They wanted to see more outreach, not only to academic professionals, classes, college levels, but also to the K through 12 range. The message that they wanted to see was soil is vital to life on Earth. I think we can all agree to that. They also had quite a discussion on environmental change. One of the main things that they wanted to have the development of indicators of soil change. So I think this is something that we all recognize, but how do we quantify that as a science? So again, if these are things that caught your attention, go to the committee meetings that we'll have later on today. The technology committee met. One thing they talked about was they still wanted to see, and this we've heard from before, from other meetings, is they wanted to see the development of an interpretations engine. This is the type that can do site interpretations using the same criteria that we use to develop our other soil interpretations, but to do it based upon what we find at a certain site when we're out in the field, not applying to a more generalized map unit or component concept. They wanted intermediate scale gridded soils data, and they had, and this will come up as a theme again, is to have an endorsed set of data. So I'll talk about this in a little bit, but just think about that. Can we as a cooperative endorse data sets that get out there? Can we say, we approve of this one? They had a good demonstration of GSurgo tools, which I think we'll talk about a little bit more in the technology committee. They wanted to have the soil data access facility. These are the web services, map services, feature services that are out there, strengthened and have a more prominent place in how we're using them. And we will definitely have this in the technology committee meetings. They wanted to see the development of a national covariate stack of data. So in other words, not having every region, every office, every university coming up with their own data library of different covariates for doing analysis, but have a national stack that everybody could access. They also wanted to see a better justification for the use of Google Drive and GitHub. I think this is more just looking at the overall, how do we communicate? How do we work with partners? How do we get something that isn't excuse me, restrictive to just an internal government communication system? And again, a much larger discussion on this business of NCSS endorsement. Can we, as a group, say that this has received the blessing of scientists from a diverse origin and put those out there so that others can use it and know that it has had some level of peer review? And they also, since this was Alaska, they also wanted to see a new model for soils affected by cryoturbation. The Ecological Site Committee met in Fairbanks. They wanted to see changes in the Ag 296 handbook, and I believe we have a whole afternoon dedicated to that at this conference. They wanted to have a review of the BLM AIM program. They wanted to see national standards for and protocols for riparian ecological sites, which are a very complex ecological association. And they wanted to have better definition of what the types of ecological information, soils information, landscape information are needed for forested ecological sites. They also wanted to have a review on the current status of ESIS, and I'm sure that'll be discussed today at the Ecological Site Committee meeting. There have been changes on that since the last time we met. They wanted to see a distinction between the use of the plants database of NRCS and the ITIS database of National Park Service. Maybe unique to all of their regional conferences was that there was a bylaws committee meeting in Fairbanks, at which time they decided that the ESD committee needed to be moved from an ad hoc status to permanent committee status. So I think that's something that the bylaws committee on a national level ought to be discussing. They also wanted to see the interpretations committee be established on an ad hoc basis. They had two ad hoc committees that met during the conference. One was the Lower 48 Initial Mapping Committee, where they wanted to see the immediate posting of the best available soils data. So let's get that stuff out there that the BLM has worked on, that the Forest Service have worked on, that others have worked on. If we can achieve some level of standards to it, let's get it out there so people can use it. They also set up an ad hoc Alaska Initial Mapping Committee and discussed, does there need to be a new standard for Alaska data versus Lower 48 data? They wanted to be able to deal with the Soils 2026 plan, which that was a year ago. Things were kind of new back then. So hopefully there will be a discussion. There will be a discussion during this conference on the Soils 2026 initiatives. They also had a good discussion on the poor data quality of data sets for Alaska. This was a real eye-opener for me because I didn't realize that so very little quality control because of lack of access has gone into so many of the Alaska data sets. So some of the things that we take for granted as far as land cover status, as far as vegetative information, DEM, haven't really been QC'd to the same level in Alaska that we kind of enjoy in the lower 48. So a very significant issue, and one that I know I've talked with USGS about. Let's get better data and better quality control data. They also had a few proposals on trying to segment Alaska into areas that could be mapped using Order 2 and Order 3 surveys versus those that might need Order 4 or Order 5 surveys. Again, focusing and listening to some of the concerns of the land use folks, the tribes up there, the land use planners, focusing on areas of higher intensity data needs. Oh, what else did they discuss? It was a good meeting. They discussed quite a bit. Again, on standards as far as the same standards between Alaska and the lower 48. So I'll move over to the South Regional Conference. It was held in Rincon, Puerto Rico, June 20th through 23rd, 2016. Again, some of the things that were particular to their discussion to a Caribbean or Southeast focus, they did talk again about climate hubs from a Caribbean perspective. a Caribbean area collaborative efforts towards soil health. So how do we deal with soil health in something that isn't often typical to the rest of the nation? They talked about Soil Science Division international activities in the Caribbean and Latin America, discussion on Caribbean neon sites, using ArcSIE to predict soil components in serpentine-controlled landscapes, and the effects of salinity on soils along the Gulf Coast as a result of hurricane seawater inundation. The next South Regional National Cooperative Soil Survey Conference will be combined with the Northeast region next year and will be held in Summersville, West Virginia on June 18th through the 22nd. No, my notes say, no. Say it a little bit louder, Jay. I have to add 7 to that then, don't I? It will be held on June 25th through the 29th. Okay. Was this a recent change? Okay. Anyway, get those dates down. So some of the specifics that were talked about at their meeting on their Ecosystem Dynamics Committee was Forest Service and NRCS in ESD development, looking at forming a committee with members of both Forest Service and NRCS within the region, and I think this will definitely be discussed again some more. They wanted to see workshops of FIA and NRCS GIS personnel so that we could share data, share expertise. They wanted to have more ESDs for existing and planned subaqueous and coastal zone mapping. So I know that this will be a topic that will be discussed more here, so y'all that are interested in subaqueous mapping, be sure and attend this committee. They wanted to be able to market more ESDs out there. They wanted to know when are we going to hire more people to get the ESD workload done. Yeah, you guys come up with that plan. I'm ready to hear that one. I think it'll be supported if we can come up with a way to do that. What are the also to make ESDs available in a raster format. So the Interpretations Committee also met in Puerto Rico. Some of their recommendations including to update the National Septic System interpretations, to revise the methods for using KSAT calculations that don't match field data. They recommended the development of urban regional mapping procedures. They wanted to ensure that forage suitability groups are included for every state express that in Web Soil Survey. They wanted to have continued work on interpretations for integrated tools for soil health. And they wanted to have continued development and funding of the Soil Health Rapid Assessment Tool. So hopefully there will be more discussion on that coming up at other committee meetings. The new Technology Committee met, and they discussed things like they wanted to see an update for Web Soil Survey. They wanted it to be faster. They wanted to facilitate raster-based maps. But overall, they wanted to see an update to refresh Web Soil Survey to reflect current web technologies. This is going to be a discussion item for the Technology Committee this afternoon, so if this is your thing, be sure and attend. They had a recommendation for the use of digital raster mapping. They wanted to see SERGO standards and National Soil Survey Handbook guidelines for raster mapping. I think we'll hear more about that from Chad Ferguson. They wanted to see a raster mapping training cadre. The recommendation was to create a training program with the goal of creating regional experts in digital raster mapping. So the DSM team will be reporting on that during the focus team session. They also wanted to see the creation of a coastal zone technical team. And again, I think we'll see a report from them during the technical team presentations. So kind of get a feeling that things that were recommended from the national conference or regional conferences, some got done, Some were tabled for further discussion. Some were brought to the national committees for action, but not everything just sat. So I think it was encouraging as I was working up these notes to see some things actually got acted on quickly, some low-hanging fruit, some setting up processes to continue for a longer period of time. Turning to the Standards Committee, they discussed some of the same things that were discussed in the Western one. They thought it was applicable to have the proposed DENSIC great groups again of UDEPs and AQUEPs. So there's 2 regions that are supporting that. They had no comments on the changes for spotasols. They thought that the proposal, and they supported it for the proposed changes in limnic materials. And they had a few other taxonomic proposals from mostly from Region 3, and I'm sure those will get discussed later. They wanted to see an Ag Handbook 296 update, catching a theme here, folks. And I think that's again, a whole afternoon that's going to be devoted just to that during these meetings. And they wanted to see the expansion of regional office and MLRA Soil Survey Office boundaries to include the subaqueous areas. So they wanted to fully recognize that. They also wanted to see changes in the NASA's data dictionary. They wanted to be able to identify the water column depth above subaqueous soils. And they wanted to update the standards for the population and use of the master W horizon. 3 soils, I think, in the U.S. right now, 3 soil series utilize the W horizon. So maybe quantifying it more would get that used more. They also had a good discussion, and I'm not going to go into great depth because there was quite a bit written on it, but it'll be in the notes, is the use of the perudic soil moisture regime and ultisols and septisols and entisols. So big issue there. Wanted a change in the base saturation percentage in defining and delimiting alpha sols. They had a discussion on the ISO soil temperature regimes and the consistency of application to that, using the definition of 10 degrees centigrade for ISO frigid. And they had quite a discussion on looking at total clay in classification. They felt that the carbonitic clay had been a little ignored over the years. And whereas they recognized that carbonitic clay does come into play for so many things with available water capacity, CEC, things like that, but they felt that it was not paid enough attention to in classification, so they wanted to see some changes there. So that should be brought forth to the national committees. That's all I had. There were 2 other regions too, but we have a lot to take care of at our meetings this time, so have a good set.
So to continue on, Curtis Monger is going to talk about the recommendations from the other regions.
Well, thank you very much. Live streaming, Ken Sheffy. Could you check on the soil survey manuals? It doesn't look like they've arrived yet. So, yeah, contact Alan at the distribution center. So, all right. North Central and the Northeast conferences were the ones that I attended, and so they were at the North Central was at the Northern Illinois University in July. The month before that, there was one, the Northeast was in Lake Placid, beautiful place to have a meeting, and Cornell University was the host. The organizers were Ron Colvin and Mike Cohen and Sam Indurante, so I'll start out with the North Central first. There were 85 participants that attended the North Central meeting, and presentations from that group included soil change, colluvium, the definition of colluvium versus alluvium, and I think we'll hear about that again. Climatology in the Midwest, or how the climate is actually changing and affecting agriculture, and how agriculture itself is a feedback in that system. Talk about soil systems in general, not only the fact that that we're real good at being analytic in the sense that we make maps and we have this beautiful continuous landscape that we divide up into pieces. But now that we have the pieces, how do those pieces communicate laterally with respect to water flow and pollutants and so forth? And one thing that ties it together in many cases is the hydrology. Presentations on Sergo and various new technological techniques. Being in the Midwest, there was a lot with respect to crops and crop management, and how soil survey has traditionally played a role and will play a role in the future. Soil geomorphology with respect to glacial features and paraglacial features, and how these subtle features can still be seen on the landscape. The land, in a sense, has a memory of former glacial climates. And future of soil survey. Okay, those were some of the presentations. The field trip dealt with pedology and geomorphology, again looking at very subtle glacial features, and but not only from just a genesis standpoint, but there is also a lot with respect to linking soil survey to a more utilitarian. What good is it to humanity? And that would be one of the big things was dynamic soil properties. Okay. There were updates and reports from many cooperators. I've only listed a few here, and the complete report is on the website. It might be a little hard to navigate to it, but it's there, and you can do like me. I don't navigate, I just Google. Okay, and if you Google National Cooperative Soil Survey regional meetings, it'll take you right there. So, but the USGS had a presence, the Illinois State Geological Survey, the Illinois Department of Agriculture, the University Extension, and so forth and so forth. They're quite a robust group of cooperators. The regions gave presentations and updates. These were, several regions are represented in the North Central. 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, and 12 were there. There were state reports from various Midwestern states. And then the committee recommendations, there were 5 committees, and I will walk through these, starting with the Soil Taxonomy and Standards Committee. And I'll just point out a few things, and you can read the details yourself if you're interested. But I broke them into approved, not approved, and no comment. So the approved had to do with some of the proposals that had been generated in this region, but the spotted soils and the spotted horizon designations didn't necessarily come from that region, but it was still approved. The buried soil concept, this would be number 8 down at the bottom under approved. At this point, the fact that it needed work, they thought was a good idea, and they approved it. Not approved, okay, unlike what Dave Hoover reported from the other 2 regions, had to do with the DENSIC. So they felt like these proposals that had DENSIC in there needed more work. They just weren't quite there yet. And I think the idea that they were going with is DENSIC. Are we talking, in glacial regions from compaction with glacial ice? Or are we talking some type of bedrock that has the appearance of being DENSIC? Or even plow pans, heavy equipment? as in even as John Warner pointed out, there was even talk about an APD, okay, DENSIC in that respect. So the bottom line was DENSIC is very important, but it really needs to be sorted out still. There's still some work to be done on the DENSIC. So a lot of that was not approved. Didn't have any comments on the osmotic mineralogy and sandy soils or the initiation of a URMIC diagnostic horizon. And so the issue here is a few years ago, the uppercase V was adopted and now is in the soil survey manual coming out. And so here you have this vesicular horizon that we recognize morphologically, okay? But it's only a diagnostic, it's only a morphological recognition. There isn't a quantitative diagnostic epipeton. Maybe there should be, maybe there shouldn't be, but more work needs to be done on this. And so if there should be some primary questions like of what practical aspects are related to a URMIC diagnostic horizon. Does it affect water infiltration? Does it represent a horizon that's very fragile in the sense that if it's disturbed, it emits a lot of dust in dryland areas? So those are some of the comments on the standards and soil taxonomy. Go down to research priorities. I just put the narrative summary here and underlined a few of the main points. Tile drainage. Drainage has been traditionally very important in the Midwest to lower those water tables and allow agriculture, and so that's a major issue with respect to many things, even soil development. And then another issue that floated to the top that emerged is soil safety in urban areas or urban soils in cities, and so in many respects, including community gardens. So a lot of opportunity in the urban soil realm, and then development of new tools like LIDAR, but also big data was brought to the highlight, and that's kind of like that's the era. We're in the big data era, and so they recognize that in that committee. If we go to new technology, some of the points there, I thought this was real insightful. They start out by saying that we need to focus and collaborate, but the insight I thought was without marching orders that should be from leadership, tech projects tend to address local small needs. I thought that was, I like that. And some of the big challenges they recognized was to continue to utilize the R package, Soil Interpretations ArcGIS toolbox, and other items they recognized were soil survey, web soil survey, and later today, in this session, you'll hear more about IC, and Daryl Schultz will be talking about that, and that was recognized as a very important technological development. All right, seek out super computing collaborations with the Soil Science Division, the Global Soil Map, raster, and disaggregating Sergo, okay, amongst others. There were, scores of bullets, and I just picked some of the top ones, okay. To go to soil interpretations, again, just highlighting a few of the things. There needs to be a user-friendly interpretations generator, and that generator needs to draw from outside the NRCS database and pull in not only LIDAR and so forth, but also information from NOAA. And the other big item that was identified is a script generation that is simpler than the one that exists currently. Okay? And Bob Dobos will be talking about interpretation, so I'm sure he can elaborate on this even further. Then the last thing, soil and ecosystem dynamics, that committee recommendation included the core idea was linking ecological sites to agriculture and linking ecological sites to soil health and soil health indicators to scale it up, landscape scale. So then if we move over to the northeast, Cornell, and Jonathan Russell Anili and Richard Shaw were the leaders putting this together. There were 52 participants at this meeting, and many of those gave presentations on topics that included fundamental changes to soil taxonomy, ecological sites, coastal systems, carbonscapes, microbial diversity, reports on the type of research taking place at the University of Maryland, Penn State, and so forth, and in urban soils. And I had also mentioned about the soil survey, and at that point, that was last summer, our goal was to get this thing updated and printed and hard copies delivered by 2017, which we did, and it's available. And like I mentioned, there should be 2 boxes on their way here. If anybody doesn't have a copy, we'll make them available for you, but they're online. And so you can get the PDF, and you can also get a CD as well. And so having a hard copy has advantages, but having the PDF where you can do word searches and so forth has an advantage as well. The other thing that I had mentioned there, and Dave Hoover talked about this as well, is updating Ag Handbook 296, the MLRA updates. And what we had done, the general strategy here was to break it into 3 phases or 3 steps. And step 1 was the assessment. And that's basically what we're going to be doing here at this meeting, June 2017. And the assessment is, okay, which lines need to be changed? And some people say none, or, well, these lines need to be changed just a little bit. But that's the assessment. The proposal will actually be sending in the shape files, and that's due in December, where you think the lines should be and why, the justification. Or if you think that there are MLRAs that need to be LRUs or vice versa, that's the proposal stage. And then the third step would be harmonization, and hopefully there won't be a lot of need for this, but that's getting neighbors to agree where the boundaries should be. So that's the idea of harmonization, and the cartographic quality as well. Looking at the different scales, are the lines too jagged, or do they need to be smooth, that sort of thing. The field trip in the Adirondacks and Whiteface, and a major point was to look at Andic soil properties, but in the Adirondacks. And it comes back to this notion of non-tephra andisols, or spodics having Andic properties, and the fact that they key out that way. The question is that what we want as a national cooperative survey to take place? Do the definitions need to be tweaked a bit? Do the lab methods, the sodium fluoride test, need to be tweaked a bit so that the mapping, the units are where the original concepts were? Volcanic ash, low bulk density, phosphorus retention, that sort of thing. So this is still, again, further work that needs to be done in soil taxonomy. The updates and reports, the cooperators, okay, the SSSA, Soil Science Society of America, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NatureServe, and others. And I have one that Rich just gave me to add to the cooperator list, and that's Brooklyn College will be a cooperator in the future. Okay, all right, okay. And so there were 3 regions that gave updates, 3, 6, and 12. The committee recommendations were addressing these categories, and I'm only going to present a couple of these. Soil taxonomy and standards, okay, not so much in agreement with the Midwest, with the North Central, okay? So approved DENSIC, okay? That idea was approved, and it sounded like the South and the West were more in terms of, were more agreeable to approving the DENSIC. Not so much. I mean, the DENSIC here was not a problem, okay? Not approved the bedrock fragments and DENSIC materials, the way that the flow chart has been organized by Wayne Gabriel and others. They felt like this was a good start, but it might need a little tweaking. So no comments, and not discussed were the isotic, the initiation of the yermic, being the aquic hapudults and calcareous fins, subaqueous soil revisions, and others. So there were things that weren't discussed. All right, let's see. I'm locked up. But I'm almost done. I can write it out. Okay, so bylaws. That was the other one that I wanted to mention. There was a lot of effort looking at the bylaws in the Northeast, and so the thing that I wanted to say about the bylaws, there's a lot of detail, but the next chair of the bylaw committee is Rich Sean. I wanted to, that we got that right. And the other thing they had in the bylaws is the next meeting, the joint meeting between the Northeast and the South. And they mentioned West Virginia too. No dates, but they just mentioned that the next meeting would be in West Virginia. So those were the 2 things that that I remember from the bylaws, and that was pretty much what I had put together to present to you. So the fact that it's locked up is probably a good thing. Okay? All right. Okay. Okay. I'm good. Yeah. All right. Any questions or in terms of collective memory? Does anybody want to add important details that I might have overlooked? Okay. All right. Good. Okay. We're out.
Hey, we're actually ahead of schedule. I know this doesn't happen very often, these things. So a couple things I might want to mention before we move on with the next presentation. First of all, lunch is coming up in about another hour or so, and Christy asked me to just give you what the options would be for lunch. I think most of you are aware that there is a restaurant in the hotel here, and they have been alerted that there might be an onslaught around noon of people coming in. So that would be one option. The other option is the Sandbar that I know a number of you have been to already, and that's also on the premises here. Joe's Crab Shack over across the way, that direction is another option. And the fourth one that's very close by is the Stagecoach Inn, which would be off in this direction. So those would be the four options. We would like everybody to be back by 1 o'clock. And if you've looked at the agenda, what we're doing this afternoon is going to be a little bit different. And that is that we have a number of technical presentations, and those will be given here in this room. We also have some breakout committee meetings. And for example, from 1 to 3, we've got the Standards Committee, which will be meeting in the Clearwater Room. Consult your hotel map to find these places. And I won't even try to give you instructions. The Research Committee will be in the Liberty Room, and the Interpretations Committee will be in the Delamar Room, okay? And so while those are going on, there will also be presentations in here. And then we'll have a break from 3 to 3:30, and then after that, we will have more technical presentations here in this room, and the Taxonomy Committee will be meeting in the Delamar Room. The Soil and Ecosystem Dynamics Committee will be meeting in the Clearwater Room, and the Technology Committee will be in the Liberty Room, okay? So you get your choice of what you would like to participate in. The one other thing, when Jody Johnson Maynard had to leave, and she realized she still had one giveaway item, and she did have one more trivia question for everybody, so hey, let's go ahead and do it. So again, same rules as before. Those of you working in Idaho, or those of you that have worked in Idaho in the past, are going to be ineligible to participate in this. So, and the question is, what is the name of the Idaho state soil? Who got it first? And how did you know that? Really? Well, this is a good example of how it pays to pay attention to things. So you can come up here and claim your prize. Okay, I don't think it's going to hurt to be a couple minutes ahead of schedule, because we can quickly fall behind. The next presentation is going to be dealing with the National Cooperative Soil Survey Strategic Plan. And you may have noticed on the table there, a number of copies of the strategic plan have been placed there for you to look at and for your reference. Please feel free to take them, read them. There are plenty of them laying around, so if you need a copy, I'm sure we can find one for you. And this is really a lead-in to the next presentation, which is going to be on the strategic plan. And we actually have a group that will be presenting this. I think Dave Limbo is going to lead it off, and Jennifer Mason and Meredith Albers from NRCS will also be involved, and then Jim Thompson from West Virginia University will also be participating. I don't know how you guys want to do this, so I'll just leave it up to you. Okay.
And let's see if I can figure this out this time.
Just don't lock it up.
Try not to. Okay. All right. So, National Cooperative Soil Survey Draft Strategic Plan. Come later this week, Wednesday, you will be voting on this. So I just want to get you prepared for that. One other vote that I would like to have you do, and just something for you to think about. Next year next year, 2019 is when we will be doing the next national conference for the Cooperative Soil Survey. It is tentatively scheduled to be in the Southeast. There is a proposal to not do it in the Southeast and to act, just bear with me, and I want you to think about this, to actually do it in conjunction with the Soil Science Society of America's meeting, which will be in San Diego in January of 2019. SSSA will be meeting by itself, not with the Crop Society or the Agronomy Society. So if we would all like to do that, just need to know the go-ahead so that we can contact SSSA and work something out. Again, the advantage could be more technical presentations, so that we will have, everybody could go to SSSA, and then we would have an abbreviated version, mainly focusing on the business aspect, the committee reports, etc., for the National Cooperative Soil Survey at the end of the SSSA meeting. So you'd have an opportunity to go to SSSA as well as this conference. Kill two birds with one stone, a week of soils plus field trips in Southern California in January. I just want you to think about that. All right? So Debbie already says yes. Okay, so I want you to think, I will remind you several times more. It will help, I think, with travel. We all know how that is. So, moving on. Draft strategic plan, that doesn't work. All right, we had team members were assigned. I know you can't read this, sorry, but there were a number of people. We got together in Lincoln, Nebraska last May, hashed out the strategic plan, and again, to me, doing a strategic plan, the plan is important. It helps us know where we're going, what we're doing, what we're supposed to wake up every day and do, but it's the process. Seeing what people think, thinking differently, thinking cooperatively, and coming up with something that we can all work with. So there were a number of folks there from the Soils Division, from the states, from federal agencies, from universities, and we had a great facilitator in Aaron Aiken. We did buy him a cattle prod, so it did help at times. So why do we do a plan? Okay, audience participation. Why do we do a plan? Decide what to do, all right? So without a plan, you will go somewhere. Is it where you want to be? All right? And again, before this plan, did the Cooperative Soil Survey have a strategic plan? Did it have a plan of where to go? I hear crickets. No, it did not. So maybe it was time for something. So the idea is we want to keep the Cooperative Soil Survey moving. We want to keep it fresh. We need to know where we're going. That was part of the impetus behind all of us getting together to develop the plan. I think we came up with a good one. I will let the rest of the folks on the communication team give you the details on it. We did send this out for comments in June of 2016. This is just a view of the website that shows you, yes, we actually solicited comments. How many did we get? Oh, no, we got more than one. That was good. At least we got more than one. We got several that focused primarily on what the role of the Soil Science Division and within NRCS was. So they kind of weren't talking about the Cooperative Soil Survey. They were focusing on what the division was doing. They were good comments. They were talked about. We've actually incorporated some of those comments in the division's strategic plan. We had a couple of comments from cooperators, which was great. I'm always glad when somebody outside of our group actually reads this, and these are folks that were not, currently cooperators, looking for further partnerships. From my perspective, that means at least the draft was a success. We are expanding our group, so that's a good thing. The one I really liked, I got a comment from a soil scientist in Romania who took the plan, translated into Romanian, and posted it. So again, to me that's pretty good, and applauded the American leadership. So we're still seen as being a leader when it comes to soil science. And again, to me, that is a great thing to have. It made me feel good that day. Then other things happened. But anyhow, so the idea is we did get a few comments, not a lot. There's still opportunity for folks to comment here. Please do so. The rest of the presentation will deal with what goes into a strategic plan from the mission, vision, goals, and future. So with that, Jen, you're up.
We deliberated for about, 3 whole days or so on this. And of course, you got to see where you're going, your purpose, goals to achieve, and then the future with those. Okay. The first thing is the vision, a society that values soils as an ecological resource. I'm not going to go into much detail about this. This is all in the plan on your table. I do encourage you to read this. Provide knowledge about soils and ecosystems for resource management. And here we get into the goals. Communication, big deal. That's why we're here as a team, to communicate the mission, the vision, the goals to the public across the nation for all cooperators. Communicate the importance of soils to society, increase the knowledge base for soils and ecosystems, strengthen and expand the collaboration, which is a huge deal for us, especially on the communications team. Ensure a critical mass of well-qualified soil scientists and technical specialists. This is where I'm really going to kind of leave really the bulk of the strategic plan. I kind of want to toot our horn because we've been working really hard for a year, a little over a year. Communication, branding, and visibility. We looked at the future of the National Cooperative Soil Survey. Most of us are on the ground. We're in the trenches. We're dealing with people every day. One of our first goals, and one of the communicated ideas when we were out there the week in Nebraska, we are seeing a loss of the knowledge of the National Cooperative Soil Survey in our everyday activities. Everyone's been affected by budgets, staffing, restructurings, reorganizations, and it's not just the Soil Survey Division, it's all of us. If you haven't seen it, most likely you will in the next 5 to 10 years. In that is the loss of what you can do under the umbrella of the National Cooperative Soil Survey. This is our team. We broke off into several teams that week once we developed the strategic plan. I'm a soil survey project leader in Clinton, Tennessee. Meredith Albers is a resource soil scientist and acting state soil scientist for Utah, Salt Lake City. Jim Thompson is a professor at West Virginia University. Linda Green, who is a phenomenal public affairs specialist, USDA NRCS. Paul McDaniel, our own, University of Idaho. And Pam Thomas, Associate Director of the USDA NRCS Soil Survey Division. One of the things that we were charged with directly from the strategic plan was to develop our own communications plan for the National Cooperative Soil Survey, vet it through the public affairs staff, and investigate and create an online clearinghouse for all things associated with National Cooperative Soil Survey. And Meredith, if you want to chime in with more detail, you're more than welcome to. I think you're better at that than I am sometimes. When we developed our communication plan, we did that first, and we kind of have a monthly teleconference that we attend. We hashed out the biggest priority items that we needed to complete. We broke ourselves into long-term, short-term goals. First thing is, how do we communicate with you? Emailing lists seem to be antiquated. I dealt with that when I was chair of the taxonomy committee for the Southern Regional meeting. Had a lot of bounce back, didn't have a lot of feedback. So Meredith had a really good idea of going through the Gov delivery system, and that's worked really well for us so far. We are happy with the results. Tammy Cheever sends us statistics from time to time, which is really good to view, to analyze for what we do. We also develop articles for the National Cooperative Soil Survey newsletter, conferences, workshops, meeting. We talk about it anywhere we go. And, this is something that, you can do in the field. Talk about what you can achieve under the umbrella of the National Cooperative Soil Survey. If people are like, what are you talking about? Sit down with them. Talk about it. Explain who we are. We're 118 years old. We've been doing this for a long time. It's time to look to the future to see how we can take the discipline of soils, keep it alive, and maintain it. Long-term goals. We did investigate the National Cooperative Soil Survey web pages, which are housed within the soils.gov.usda website. There's a lot of good information there, and we decided after much deliberation that we can maintain these web pages and use them as the online clearinghouse. And I really want to give a big thanks to Tammy Umholtz and Tammy Cheever. If we have an idea for small changes at first, they implement this so quickly. They've been a huge help to our purpose and our achievement. So we're currently reviewing the web pages. I know we've discussed with Tammy, the new format is coming out. Once that new format gets in place, we're going to take a look at revising the web pages to make them more streamlined, easier to use, and better to access, and easier to find material that we disseminate as an organization. We're looking at keeping the university courses up to date. We're also investigating OPM requirements for job positions, following up with the OPM staff regarding more specific guidelines for serious qualifications. We're also looking at creating an outreach section. And this is where you may see solicitations from us in the future. In fact, you will, for your activities when you're involved with the National Cooperative Soil Survey, whether it's land judging, whether you're teaching a course with the university. The activities that you do on a day-to-day basis tie right into the activities of the National Cooperative Soil Survey. We're also looking at locating and posting original MOUs and guidance documents for the National Cooperative Soil Survey. This kind of led to another idea that I've talked with my regional director about. We're revising the MOU as a result of this strategic plan, revising it for the modern day structure, to reach out to more cooperators. It's a good way to communicate with people that we have communicated with in the past, and to also reach out to new people that might want to work with us in the future. And of course, we consult with Tammy Cheever and Tammy Umholtz for website revision, templates, and agency standards. And again, they are a huge help to us. I'm going to exit stage left and turn this over to Jim Thompson. One of the ideas that we really came up with, branding, visibility, communication, logo. You have to be visible. So I'm going to turn this over to Jim.
Good morning. So I think everybody's seen the logo by now. You have it on your hat, on your name tag, on your swag bag. This is, interestingly, back in 2011 at the National Conference in Asheville. I would say that Dave Hoover is really planted the seed for this logo. He made a comment that he was looking for an NCSS logo that he could use for his presentation, and commented that there really wasn't one, and at least nothing official. And at the time, I had a graphic artist working for me at the Geospatial Research Unit there in Morgantown. And so when I got back to campus, I said, why don't you come up with a logo? And so that was back in 2011. And this is the logo she came up with. And it sort of sat there for a while. And then when this strategic plan came back on board, we revived it. And so I hope you like it. If you don't, keep it yourself. So there's the two elements. There's a stylized soil profile and then the word mark. And they should be kept together as part of that logo. We're working on a visual standards guide or a style guide for using that, and I'll get to that in a moment. Because and actually you see that on the hat and your name tag and the bag. We've actually used it a couple different configurations. So there's actually 5 official configurations for it. And so if you need something long and narrow or tall, or for whether it's a T-shirt or whatever, you can choose one of these different configurations. Don't distort it. Don't change the colors. Don't only use part of the logo. Don't only use the profile, or only use the word mark. They're designed to be used together. I don't claim to be a graphic artist, but when the graphic artist tells me these things, I believe her, because she's trained and I'm not. And so hopefully you'll be able to, with those different configurations, find one that fits the application that you're trying to do. It also comes in different colors because sometimes you have a dark background, sometimes you have a light background, sometimes you have are only going to print in one color, or you're only using black and white. So there's a color version, there's a reverse color version. So if you're going to put it on and that's actually darker than I expected it, but on a dark background, the text is in white instead. There's a grayscale version. There's a white version if you're on a really dark background, and a black version if you're using one color printing. So there's different versions of this. You can choose the one that fits your needs. And it's all available on the NRCS webpage for the NCSS. You should, if you, like Curtis said, if you Google NRCS, NCSS, you'll find your way to this. But recognizing that it's not always easy. We work with Tammy Umholtz, and we got a short URL for it. I haven't come up with a mnemonic for it quite yet, but XNWWN, somebody can come up with something, Fragic and Natric and Cambic or something like that. I don't know, but there's a short way to get there, and you can download So there's 5 different configurations, 5 different colors. So there's 25 different versions of the logo, and you can download it from that web page. And so I encourage you to use it if you're doing something representing not just your institution or agency, but the National Cooperative Soil Survey. We'd love to see you get this out in front of people's eyes so they can start to recognize what we do collaboratively and collectively as the National Cooperative Soil Survey. And like Jen was saying, it fits within this idea of trying to communicate what we do as the NCSS. I think that it'll be something that we can point to as helping to tie us together as this collaborative. We have a poster that'll be up with the poster session that further illustrates some of the things that we're trying to do as the communications team, trying to build on this visual identity. We hope that it's something that'll show up in multiple venues as we're trying to build that branding of the NCSS. Jen talked about the NCSS newsletter. We hope to have a recurring feature in that highlights some of the NCSS activities, sort of these success stories from out in the field, investigating, doing some things with story maps and things like that. And so I hope that you'll see that in the weeks and months and years to come as we try and build on that brand. And it all ties back to that strategic plan. And so my last comment is to make a plug for the vote on Wednesday afternoon. Adopt a strategic plan. So.
We might have time for a question or two.
Yeah, so if I had questions about the communications team with Jen and Meredith and Paul and Linda and Pam who aren't here, or about the logo. I'll work on that. I don't have a prize, but I hope everybody knows who that is. No, it's not you guys.
Yeah, it was going to go through like official style, so that it was approved by public affairs. This is.
All right, so the question was approval by public affairs, and I suppose I have my take on that since I'm not NRCS, and neither is the NCSS, and so public affairs really shouldn't have any say in it because it's not the NRCS, it's the NCSS, and we're an independent entity, my opinion.
Do you have any caps left over from this meeting that we can get out in the field?
The question is there any extra caps? That's a question for Paul McDaniel because those were I can't claim credit for that. I gave the artwork to Paul, and he made the caps.
Okay, so about the caps, we only had, I think, 120 that were printed up. The reason being, as recently as a month ago, as far as we knew, there were only 40 people that were coming to this thing. So at the time, we figured that's going to be more than enough. Well, a lot of people apparently got travel authorization, and the next thing you know, we end up with 116 people here. But Christy has already placed an order for more caps, and she has promised that anybody who's registered for the conference will receive one. I don't know what the timeline is, but you will get one. And I'll give you Christy's email just in case you don't.
Along those lines, I might suggest that, because I've had a comment made to me that another cap. I go to these meetings and I get another cap. So there's probably some people in the room that really just don't want another cap. So if you want to give your cap to somebody who does want another cap, you could do that. I think they're fabulous. I'm not biased, but they're fabulous. Yeah. Yeah, and if you, because of the logos are available, if you want to make your own NCSS swag, you can do that. You know, you should have gotten a sticker in the in your bag that Paul had created, you know, from that same artwork, and we've already talked about doing some T-shirts and things like that. So it's as much effort as you want to put into it, really. Yeah. Well, why don't I know who it is? Why don't you tell me who it is? It's Guy D. Smith. Yeah. So I declared there was no prizes. I'll give Curtis an extra sticker. Yes. Yeah.
So do you think it'd be worthwhile to recruit a federal partner, another federal partner for your communications team? I didn't see any Forest Service or BLM.
So the question was, would there be any merit to recruiting additional federal partners for the communications team? And like Jen said, the answer is yes. Anybody who, if you're keen on getting involved in this, we would love it. We would absolutely embrace some more minds on it, and you can get in touch with me or with Jen or Meredith or anybody on the team. And one thing that I'd like to add, so you can, like I mentioned, there's a poster, and between the posters and the logo itself and other things we hope to develop over the coming weeks and months, is that these are things that you can take and use as is or modify for your particular purpose. So if you're going somewhere with with one of your state soil science societies or something like that, and would like a poster to highlight the NCSS, you don't have to necessarily create that for yourself. You can take some of the things that we're trying to create as part of this communications team. So you don't have to. So each of us doesn't have to reinvent the wheel every time we want to do something related to publicizing the NCSS. We'll have sort of a library, if you will, of things that you can draw upon. And if you have ideas for things that maybe you don't have the time to do or the expertise, we say, hey, you folks on the communications team, can you make something like that happen? We'll consider it and see if we can make that part of our repertoire. Any other questions? Comments? All right.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Paul.
So we're going to change gears again for this morning, and the last two presentations that we're going to have before the lunch break are going to be the start of the technical presentations for the conference. And first up is going to be Dr. Dave Myrold from Oregon State University. He's going to be talking about mapping microbial communities in Oregon soils. Dave, I didn't see your, yeah, you know what it's called. I don't, so. Hopefully it's, oh, NCSS Boise 227.
Okay, well, it's great to be here, and I'm happy to be able to talk about some of the research that we've been involved with over the last couple of years in cooperation with this group in the NRCS. And to begin with, I'd like to start with a few acknowledgments. The research was supported through a grant from the NRCS, and also there's an organization called the Earth Microbiome Project, which did all of the sequencing. At OSU, I have a graduate student working with me, Chris Burgess, and he was responsible for virtually all of the analysis that was done in the data, which I'll show to you. And then we had a wide number of people from the soil survey from the NRCS who helped us out, and particularly with field sampling and in the design of the study. And there's a few people in the room here, I think, who actually took a few samples of soils for what I'm going to be talking about today. So colloquially, we call this the Microbe Map project. And the idea behind this is to be able to integrate microbial community information into the soil survey. So maybe a little bit of a test bed. So there's a really rich amount of soil physical and chemical data that's collected for every soil that's described. And I think we all appreciate that there's also a biological component there that's very important, but it's been less well studied, but the methodologies have progressed to such a state where we can do that now. And so we're trying to look at this connection between the microbial communities and those other soil properties. And in addition, we're interested in the connection between the biology in the soil microorganisms, and soil health. Okay, they're the engine that really process the materials that turn over the organic matter that contribute to the living portion of the soil, which is very critical to soil health. And so ideally, perhaps we can come up with some sorts of indicators of different levels of soil condition. And so related to that, when we look at the data that we're collecting, we feel that these microbial communities are going to be primarily influenced by the soil chemical and physical properties, as opposed to, I have here, geographic distance. So in other words, the soil environment itself is going to filter out and determine those communities, as opposed to some sort of a dispersal limitation, two soils close together and organisms moving from one to the other, that those soil characteristics are going to be most important in setting up the microbial community. Okay. We also think that there's going to be significantly more spatial variation among these soil communities than temporal variation. And this is a practical outcome, because if indeed microbial communities are very responsive to seasonal changes, then it's going to matter when you sample a soil for the microbial communities, whereas that's probably not going to be as likely for soil physical or even soil chemical properties. Okay. And then lastly, we are interested ultimately in the connection between the composition of the communities and soil health. So those are the motivating factors behind our work. So the sampling scheme was developed largely by Thor Thorson. He was the former soil scientist for the state of Oregon, who has had an intimate knowledge of the soils throughout the state, had been involved in mapping many of them. And so he sat down and he pulled this together. So we wanted to have good representation across the state, so all of the MLRAs in the state were identified and used. In addition, there are a variety of CRAs within each of these. Not every CRA was sampled, but most of the ones in the state were sampled. And we also tried to partner this with existing databases. So many of these were rapid carbon assessment sites. There were benchmark soils, so we captured all of those soil series which covered large geographic areas across the state. We picked out some unique soils, make sure to get some serpentine soils, which are present in one corner of the state, for example. And we also wanted to collect our soil samples in the same geographic location, at least as close as we could get to where the type pedons for the different soil series were sampled, so that we'd have more site-specific data from the NRCS database in terms of those soil characteristics. So across the state of Oregon, we sampled, more than 100 soils were sampled, and at each location we had 5 individual samples collected. So there was a center point, and then in each of the cardinal directions, about 10 meters away from that, we collected an additional sample. So that allowed us to get this within site variability. So we had over 500 samples, which we ultimately analyzed. All the soils that we focused on were the top 15 centimeters of the soil, so the organic rich layer of these soils. So we didn't have the opportunity to go down into the subsoil, which I think in terms of relationships with soil taxonomy might actually be quite an interesting exercise to do. From the temporal samples, we selected 5 sites throughout the state, which we went back and we sampled those on a monthly basis to get an idea of this temporal variation, if indeed it existed. So here's a map. Each of the circles represents one of the sites or one of the soils which we sampled. You can tell they're fairly well distributed across the state. A little, for some reason, usually aligned along major highways in terms of sampling. But still a good representation across the state. And there was represented a variety of land use, croplands, pasture land, rangeland, forested lands. The cropland probably a little bit more represented than some of the others, but still we got, I think, at least 15 or 20 samples within each of those land use categories. They also represent 10 different soil orders. So as was mentioned this morning for Idaho, Oregon also has 10 of the soil orders present, and so we were able to capture all of those as well. So the type of data that we're utilizing will be able to get the environmental factors such as mean annual temperature, mean annual precipitation. Whenever soils were sampled, we know the land use, we know the current vegetation cover of those sites, and we also did an on-site assessment of soil condition or soil health, and this was optimized for each of the land uses that we worked at. And in the end, within each of those land use categories, we had soil health scores that varied from the low end to the high end. So we kind of captured that variation as well in our sampling scheme. Soil properties, we measured the water content at the time we sampled, total carbon, total nitrogen, pH. We did laboratory incubations to get short-term incubations, get an idea of biological activity, carbon and nitrogen mineralization. And then each of these, as I said, was co-located with data that we can pull from the NRCS database. The microbial properties which we measured were total microbial biomass. We looked at bacterial and fungal abundance, and we also looked at the composition and diversity of those bacterial and fungal communities. So, because you're probably a little bit less aware of this microbial analysis, I thought I'd just briefly describe what we did in terms of the bacterial and fungal communities. So this is all gene-based, it's all DNA-based technology that we were using. And so all organisms have ribosomes which make the proteins, and those genes tend to be highly conserved, which allow us to look at evolutionary or phylogenetic relationships. And within these sequences, 16S for the bacteria and the archaea, the ITS sequence for the fungi, there are also some variable regions which allow us to get down to, say, about the genus level, or in some instances maybe species level in terms of the organisms present there. So what we actually do from these sequences is we set a similarity index. So at 97%, if sequences are 97% or more similar, we call them operational taxonomic units. You can think about those as species. And so from these sequences, we generated operational taxonomic units. So across these 100 sites, we had 10,000 sequences. Actually, we had more than 10,000 sequences for all of these sites, but we kept them at a common basis. We rarefied to 10,000 sequences. And across the state of Oregon, this represents about 23,000 different operational taxonomic units or species. So at a given site, we didn't have all of these. Most of them were probably missing. We had a few dominant types, and then we probably had several thousand other types in all at the different sites as we went across. So this is the information which we used. So I'm going to show you some of the data that we have from the bacterial analysis, which is the first data set that we've been looking at. And so in terms of bacterial community composition, because we have these tens of thousands of operational taxonomic units, this high dimensional data, we use ordination to collapse it down into two axes. So we took all of these sequences from all of the sites, put it in this principal coordinates analysis, and are able to put these data out into this sort of a format. And so each of the symbols here represents a soil that we have data for. They're color-coded by the soil order. And those points which are close together had very similar communities. Those points that are widely separated had quite different bacterial communities. This ordination explained about 30% of the overall variation in the data, most of that along this x-axis down here, and the rest along the y-axis. And this x-axis is separated largely in the few soil properties we've looked at. So we haven't looked at all of the soil data that we have or all of the site information. But of the data that we have looked at so far, the greatest separation is along a pH axis. So those sites that are negative in values are high pH sites. The ones which are positive on that x-axis are low pH sites. So the iridosols are kind of over there on the left-hand side, for example. Okay. And this is similar to many other studies which have seen pH as being a primary factor highly correlated with the composition of communities. The x-axis separates a little bit more on a textural gradient with, make sure I can read it, the coarser soils towards the top, the positive values, and the finer textured soils down towards the bottom. Okay. So one of the things we're interested with these data is to see how these map out across the state. So here we have the sites, the data that we used in the sites, and it's color-coded. So the positive values on that previous diagram along that x-axis are coded in green, the negative values in orange. And so you can see that there's a strong gradient as you go west to east across the state that corresponds with the pH gradient, but of course it corresponds to many other gradients as well. Far wetter on the west coast of Oregon than it is in eastern Oregon. So precipitation is going to change along these lines as well, okay, as well as probably a number of other factors. We can also map it just by coming up with kind of a mean community composition for each of the CRAs which we sampled, which is what's shown in this inset. And you can see a pretty similar pattern here. So they agree to one another, whether we use some geostatistics to kind of spread this out or if we work by CRA. Okay. So this is the overall bacterial community. We can also focus on smaller groups of classes or families of microorganisms as well. What I'm going to show you in this next mapping diagram looks at a particular functional type. So we have organisms capable in soil of nitrifying, of converting ammonium into nitrate, converting from one form of plant-available nitrogen to another form of plant-available nitrogen. And for this particular process, it's kind of nice. There are relatively defined groups of microorganisms which carry out these different functions. So in the upper left-hand corner, we have those members of the archaea that are capable of oxidizing ammonia, and this is a group of organisms that was discovered only about 10 years ago. In the upper right-hand corner, we have the ammonia oxidizing bacteria. In the lower left-hand corner, we have the nitrite oxidizing bacteria. And so again, it's just a map of these organisms across the state where the darker colors are the greater relative abundance of these different types. And if I can get the light to shine, it's easiest to see in these ammonia oxidizing bacteria, but the more intense colors are associated with the dominant agricultural areas, the Willamette Valley, the Columbia Basin, some of the irrigated areas in central and eastern Oregon. And we know from other work that the ammonia oxidizing bacteria tend to be responsive to nitrogen fertilization. They tend to be higher in those soils which are fertilized. And so this data set corresponds with what we would have expected. And if you look at the lower right-hand corner, this is a map of net nitrification, the assay which we measured in the laboratory, where again the higher rates are the darker green colors. And if you take a look at these maps, you can see that there's a correspondence. Where we have more of these ammonia oxidizing bacteria, we tend to have higher rates of nitrification that we've measured. So we're able to go perhaps, at least in some instances, from the types of microbial communities which are there to some of the processes which they do. So I'd like to finish up by talking just a little bit about the temporal data. So I mentioned that we had 5 sites that we looked at. One was on the coast of Oregon, an isomesic soil. It was an irrigated pasture. These are the olive green ones up in the upper right-hand corner of this ordination, a place where we wouldn't expect much temporal variation in terms of temperature and moisture. We had a site up in the Columbia Basin. Those are the teal-colored points that are on the left-hand side of this diagram. A winter wheat growing area in continuous winter wheat, and here there are much larger seasonal extremes in temperature as well as moisture. And then there's a cluster of colored points down in the lower right-hand corner, and these are 3 sites in the Willamette Valley which are located on different soil series, all within about 1 kilometer of one another, and they overlap. So we see that you have big spatial separation at this scale. If we zero in on the Willamette Valley samples, they cluster out according to soil series. In this case, the color coding is by month of sampling. And if you look at these, those colors are kind of distributed all throughout, which suggests that within a field we have as much spatial variation as we did temporal variation. One possible exception is the one that's over on the left-hand side, and this is a very poorly drained soil which is seasonally flooded, and there we see some seasonal difference. The greatest seasonal difference we saw was in this site from the Columbia Basin, where we can actually kind of separate it into 2 clouds of point, which correspond with kind of a May through September, October period, compared with the other time of the year. And so we haven't yet analyzed this. Say it could correspond to temperature differences, water differences, but it may also correspond to plant coverage. Okay, so. In many of the soils, we don't see a strong temporal pattern. In a few, we do. Okay, so with that, just kind of come back to those hypotheses. Everything we've looked at so far does indeed support the hypothesis that these soil physical and chemical properties are going to be more influential in the composition of the soil communities. We do generally see greater spatial rather than temporal variation, which may be a good thing in terms of sampling this into the future, and we're still in the process of analyzing things with respect to soil health. So with that, I don't know that there's any time for questions, but I will certainly be around later today if you have any. Thank you.
We have time for one question.
Okay. One question only if there's one. Yes. I will. Yes.
So just because you used the term a few times, I just want to know what your definition of soil health is.
Okay, soil health. Well, I think it's simply speaking, it's a soil that's functioning at its optimal capacity for whatever use that you would have for that. We are thinking of it in this context probably more from the production of either crop production or vegetative production in the other types of systems. So that's kind of where I'm going with soil health. It would be really interesting we'll have some of the data for these sites, but we don't have all of some of the measures, lab measures that people are putting out for soil health for all of these soils, because we simply couldn't afford to do that for all of them. So I hope that helps.
So our next speaker is Daryl Schultz, and he's going to be talking about the Soil Explorer and leveraging NRCS soil databases to visualize soil landscapes. Interestingly enough, yesterday, coming back to Boise on the field trip, had a chance to sit with Daryl. He had his iPad with him, and so he was able to show me some of this stuff, and it is really cool. So I hope this will.
It'll work. I just
like
need
the
this.
confidence.
Oh yeah,
There's no sound.
no. Okay. All right, thanks, Paul. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about our Soil Explorer website and app that we've developed, and how we're leveraging NRCS soil databases to visualize soil landscapes. This is a pretty large collaborative project. I'm the PI on it, but the IC network I'll tell you more about that in a minute. The idea here is the project is called Integrating Spatial Educational Experiences, or the IC project. And the goal here, this started as the goal of teaching students how and why soils and landscapes vary at different scales and why it matters. And what we're doing is we're teaching with maps. Soil science is inherently spatial, but we don't often teach that spatial aspect very well. But we have the tools now that we can, and the databases to do this. And we're delivering these maps on iPads with the Soil Explorer app, and also on the web with the soilexplorer.net website. This gives you an idea of what we're doing in the classroom. For material where we can use the maps, in the classroom we connect the lecture concepts with what the students are seeing on the maps. And this is very interactive. It makes the classroom a lot more fun. And so then they know what they're seeing on the maps. When we go to the field, we've got the maps on the iPads on the buses. They know what they're seeing on the maps. Then they can connect that to what they're seeing in the field and the soil profiles that they're seeing. We don't do any less field work than we ever did before, but I think we're much more effective. If you think this is only for students and universities, and I know that some of the high school soil judging teams are using this. I was asked to do a program for the Wabash Valley Lifetime Learning Association earlier this spring. This is Joe Lund, 88 years old, farmed in southern Tippecanoe County all his life. I was able to connect with him with these maps. He learned something new about the soils that he grew up on and farmed. This is Gloria. She's a little slower on her feet, but she still was there every day learning about soils with the iPads. The initial project extent was for these 7 states. We started in Indiana and then branched out to these states. If you're wondering why Texas is out there, I'm originally from Texas, and Christine Morgan is a good collaborator there. The project has 4 major components: creating the maps, which I'll talk about in a minute, delivering the maps, then incorporating them into the learning environment, and then an assessment component. And in terms of map creation, this is all publicly available data that you can download from the internet. Of course, we're based very strongly on the GSERGL soils data. This is an absolutely fantastic data set. It is a national treasure in terms of the depth and the breadth of information there, and there's lots of things that we can do with that. We also draw heavily on the National Elevation Data Set, or in the case of Indiana, we pulled data from the Indiana map. We use OpenStreetMap and other maps as needed. And we've designed what's currently in the Soil Explorer is we've designed maps specifically to support teaching and learning. This dominant soil parent material map is the most complex, and it takes quite a bit of time initially to develop that for a state. But once you've got a good dominant soil parent material, it just sort of lights up the landscape, as I'll show you in a few minutes. We also have a number of other maps that are much easier to workup from the Sergo data set. And then the participants create the maps for their own states. So the map delivery, a little bit of technical background where it's all based on ArcGIS, various versions of that over the years. Right now, we just got set up on a new ArcGIS 10.5 server set up in the Purdue libraries, and we've got some really good robust server architecture behind it. The tablet for the Soil Explorer app for the iPad, this is for you techies. This is what it's programmed with. The REST services, these are standard ways of presenting data over the internet. Right now, the hillshade base map, we're in the pretty big data, 1,900 gigabytes or 1.9 terabytes of primary data right now. We also can use offline maps which use Esri's tile package format. And then we've got a web browser as well, soilexplorer.net. Here's a list of the participants. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but I've drawn on lots of colleagues in various departments at Purdue for various aspects of the project. And in terms of the state collaborators so far, these are our state collaborators, and I won't read those names, but you'll recognize many of them. And Jim Thompson is the only one from the state collaborators at the meeting right now. And also we've had a very strong collaboration from NRCS. Sharon Waltman, before she retired, she was the official liaison to the project. So we've received some additional funding from NRCS to now expand the base maps to the entire U.S. And that'll put in place the base maps to expand the content maps on a state-by-state basis as those get developed. Also with the NRCS, we were able to do the soilexplorer.net website, and an iPhone version is also in the works. I was hoping to show you the hillshade and the roads base maps for the whole U.S. or conterminous U.S. for this meeting, but just couldn't make it happen. We ran out of disk space on the server, and so we're buying some more disk space, and hopefully by mid-August you'll be able to use this, at least the base maps for the entire U.S. We worked up Maryland last summer, and that's online, and or not. It's available, but we'll have that online fairly soon. In terms of funding, I need to acknowledge Higher Education Challenge Grant Program for the part of the project, and now continued funding from NRCS. So now I want to switch. I want to show you what this is all about, and you can go to soilexplorer.net and pull this up on your laptop or iPhone. We do have a little bit of issue with zooming right now if you're coming over your cell phone network, that I hope the developers are going to get resolved hopefully today or in the next day or two. Or you can download the Soil Explorer iPad app for free. So I'm going to switch now to the iPad app, and some of you have downloaded this. We called it IC originally, but when we did the web page, we needed a different name, and so we went to Soil Explorer, which is a little more descriptive. When you bring this up, you can have local maps, which we use a lot for the teaching so that it works all the time with or without the internet. These are the local maps. But then what these maps down here are the online maps that you can get at through the internet. So I'll show you a few things here in Indiana, and we are here. The GPS dot will tell you where you are, and that'll follow you along when you're in the field. But we don't have any maps yet for Idaho. But we'll zoom in to West Lafayette, and which is where Purdue University is located. We need to wait for everything to refresh a bit. And the Purdue campus is located right here, and I'll change. I'll turn off the roads to make this a little easier to see. And you can see the dark blue of the Wabash River running north and south there. And there's lots of colors here, but the main ones here is the light blue is the recent alluvium, the current floodplain of the Wabash. The tan is the loamy glacial till. This was stuff that was under the glacial ice and smeared and packed down by hundreds of feet of ice. Very dense, very low hydraulic conductivity, and this has a lust cap on top of it. And then the other major color here is this one. The green is Wisconsin age outwash, and the Wabash was a major drain for the meltwater at the end of the ice age, and so campus is sitting on a terrace of the Wabash River. And this is coarse sand and gravel, very porous. Water moves through that very quickly. So that's the quick geology lesson. Let's switch to natural soil drainage class. And now you can see that those green areas of outwash are the well-drained soils. And if you're a homeowner in West Lafayette, if your home is in this part of town, you should have a nice dry basement if your downspouts are carrying the water away. If you're a homeowner up in these parts of up on the till plain, where the soils are somewhat poorly drained, and in places they are poorly drained, you're very likely to have a damp basement if you don't have a good footing drain and a sump pump that works. And when I give this talk to people in the community, I usually see a few heads shaking because they've had to deal with this sort of thing. And Indiana has lots of wet soils, and you can zoom out and you'll see that how much of the state is poorly drained, somewhat poorly drained, lots of tile drainage, and the issues associated with that. There's lots of other things that I'll show that you can do. This map is called the dominant, or is the surface soil color map. 70% of Indiana was forested at when the Europeans came, and so these lighter colored areas are the light colored mineral soils that formed under forests. These darker areas are the dark colored mineral soils that formed under the prairies. And so this is the easternmost extent of the Prairie Peninsula in Indiana. And so you can see what that looks like in detail, interpreted from the soil survey. This one has these pop-ups populated. This is the only layer that I've got those populated right now, so that you can provide additional information, and including definitions of what people are seeing. So let's look at one or two other things. Following Josie's, Josie was talking about the losing farmland here in the Snake River plain. There's some interesting things that popped out when I first did these maps. Here is, let's zoom into southwestern Indiana. This is Warwick County, Indiana. About 60% of this county has been strip mined, sometimes even twice. And you can see these white areas here are the mining regolith, the disturbed areas. You can see that area is the later stuff where they had to put the landscape back. You can see the windrows here from the older stuff. I'll show you one more thing, and then I think my time will be up. But you can put lots of different layers here, and I found an old map from 1852 on the Library of Congress website and georeferenced that. And where I use that in my class is that it shows very nicely where the Kankakee Marsh was. This was a large wetland, 500,000 acres of wetland in northwest Indiana. That is almost about 95% of that is now drained, and this is and so by using these maps on our northern field trip, our students really can get I think it's easy to think that the world has always been the way it is, but in a lot of cases we have made massive changes in the landscape, and this is one of the maps that help us do that. So I think my time is about up, Paul, so I think I'll stop there. I could go on for the rest of the afternoon, so.
So one quick note. Yeah, question.
Just going to say, Daryl, I don't know if you knew it, but I was able to, on my Android phone, go to the soilexplorer.net site and see the whole state of Texas.
Oh, yeah. You can. Yeah, all of Texas is up there. But like I said, there's a little bit of a bug there in zooming in and stuff, but we'll get that fixed.
And you're going to work on Idaho, right?
Well, you're going to help me with Idaho first.
So one last thing before we conclude this morning's session. Again, this afternoon, we're going to have different things going on. The technical presentations will be in here, and the various committee breakouts are going to be in either the Clearwater, Liberty, or Delamar rooms. And Christy says the easiest way to find those rooms is you go into the main lobby, and I think most of you have been in there where you checked in, and if you go up those stairs, you'll find those rooms up at the top. So what I would recommend, check your agenda, see when the meetings are, decide what you want to be doing, and go to the appropriate place. And I'd like to ask everybody to be back by 1 p.m. so we can get started on time. So thanks, everybody.